uh, that industrial complex had been operating on all cylinders during the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. And, we're still fighting those battles, still producing weapons. And of course, the military industrial complex needs to always be producing more and more weapons, whether or not they're needed or not. So you have a lot of surplus. You have a continuing flow of surplus military weapons that somebody decides that we don't want them anymore because we want to purchase some more. And so those surplus weapons then end up in the hands of these law enforcement agencies. And all the law enforcement agency has to do is go to the Defense Logistical Agency website, look at the catalog, see what they want, and then they put in a request for it, and voila, it appears there, ready for them to pick up so they can go get it from wherever it is being housed, and then they bring it back to their city or back to their university, back to the town. And the law says that within 12 months from your receipt of the item, you got to place it into use. So that means you get a lot of military weaponry being placed into use inappropriately, like when it comes to peaceful protesters, and you start seeing armored trucks and other military weapons, assault weapons, grenades, flashbang grenades. You even sometimes see bayonets on the end of rifles. These rifles that military equipment that's used on our streets against people when it should not be. And so the 1033 program is the focus of the Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act. We aim to shut that pipeline down. And so that kind of weaponry being in the hands of law enforcement causes them to become gladiators as opposed to protectors. And as gladiators, they wreak havoc in the Black community. They don't do that same kind of policing in the white communities. It would not be tolerated, but they bring it into the Black communities. And as a result, you see Black people getting killed and maimed at the hands of police for doing things like just simply running away. So, stopping militarization has a lot to do with Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter is an organization or is a group among other groups that are fighting the kind of police brutality and police killings of unarmed, oftentimes, Black people. And so we've got to stop that. And the 1033 program is a part of the problem. And Stop Militarizing Law Enforcement Act is a part of the solution. It made it into the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that was passed about a month ago in the House. And that act was passed in response to the killing of George Floyd. We all saw what happened to George Floyd, a modern day lynching on nationwide TV, on social media, 8 minutes and 46 seconds of a painful and slow demise caused by a knee of a police officer on the neck of somebody who was handcuffed and not resisting and pleading for their life, saying that I can't breathe. So we've passed that act, but it languishes in the Senate, and we need. You mentioned elections at the outstage at the beginning of your program. We do have 2 United States senators. We need 2 in Georgia up for election. Got 2 great candidates opposing them, and all we need is 4 senators across the country, 4 Democratic senators to defeat Republicans, and we'll take control of the Senate. So the vote, particularly here in Georgia, is very important.
Absolutely. You answered my follow-up question as to where did the stop militarizing police fit into the George Floyd bill, but you said it is a part of that. Uh, so
Yeah, and that George Floyd Justice in Policing Act has a number of other provisions in addition to stopping the militarization of law enforcement. It has provisions that strengthen or actually, yes, strengthen the ability of private parties to sue police officers when police officers act with unnecessary force. And it does that by making modifications to the law where people are allowed to sue for civil rights violations. It abolishes the doctrine of qualified immunity, which has been a barrier, a court um, mandated barrier to people being successful with litigation. So you'll be able to hold police accountable civilly by getting into their pocketbooks. And even more importantly, it lessened the standards to criminally prosecute police officers for depriving someone of their civil rights. It changed the standard of proof from from willful misbehavior to reckless and knowing misbehavior. That lessening of the standard makes it easier to convict police officers for violating civil rights. And when you can hold people either criminally or civilly liable, then that acts to deter them from abusing their power. And also that George Floyd Justice in Policing Act made no knock warrants, federal no knock warrants unlawful. Also made chokeholds unlawful. And then there's a number of different data collection requirements that are put in that act so as to be able to get at racial profiling. So racial profiling would be not abolished, but of course, outlawed. And you could do that by the kinds of data that you collect and the statistics based on that data. And then also the ability of police officers to move from one department to another after they have been accused of unnecessary force. These investigations are often stopped when a law enforcement officer leaves one department and then goes to another department. And so to stop this revolving door of law enforcement going from one department to the other, leaving a trail of unresolved complaints of unnecessary and abusive behavior, there will be data collected that will roll with those officers so that even the public will be able to see that data. And so a number of different provisions in the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act will result in a change in the culture of policing in this country. And we need the Senate to pass that legislation.
To that point, I understand that the bill now sits where the Senate is, as it is, will probably not approve it, will probably not pass in the Senate. Um, would that have to be reintroduced in the next Congress? Is that how that works?
Yeah, it would have to be if it does not pass in this 116th session of Congress, which ends at the end of this year, then it will have to be reintroduced and passed in the 117th session, which is a 2-year session. So sometime between 2021 and 2022, it'll have to be passed and sent back to the Senate. Senate will have to pass it, and then we'll have a president in place who will sign the legislation. If we get rid of Donald Trump in November. That's the big reason why we need folks to turn out. I think we can live with the Senate in Republican hands for another couple of years, whatever the case might be. But we just simply cannot afford for Donald Trump to be in office even past today. I'm really worried about what happens between now and the time he loses the election and the inauguration of the next president, which will come January 20th of 2021. So we've got 6 months basically from today, to withstand and endure Donald Trump.
That's a perfect segue from my next question. So conventional wisdom, whatever that is, states that the country doesn't have an appetite for more hearings on the legality of the activities of the current administration. Since the impeachment of President Trump, there have been allegations of Russia secretly offering bounties to the Taliban for the deaths of American soldiers in Afghanistan, an assessment that was included in at least one of the president's daily security briefings early this year. Is this not worthy of further investigation, or is the House hamstrung by administration officials' refusal to testify?
Well, it is a worthy area of congressional investigation and oversight. But I would point out the fact that this president has shown a disregard of congressional authority, particularly the United States House of Representatives, which is under the control of Democrats. While he cooperates in part with a complicit lapdog Senate, he refuses to cooperate with the House of Representatives. So our alternative then is to subpoena administration officials to come to our hearings. But if they fail to do so or refuse to do so, then we're left with going to court to enforce the subpoena. And so now we have a couple of cases that are already in the court that have been in the judicial arena for months upon months and are still not ready to be resolved yet because the courts move so slow. And so pretty much Donald Trump is in a position to play out the game clock, if you will, by refusing to cooperate. And then the only other thing that Congress can do when a president fails to respect congressional authority is to impeach the president and remove him from office. And unfortunately, we've seen that no matter what this president does, the Senate, under the leadership of the Republicans led by Mitch McConnell, not going to convict the president and remove him from office for a high crime and misdemeanor. So we're stuck with this president and we're stuck with this Senate until the elections. And it's important that we get rid of the majority in the Senate under the Republican control, and also, and most importantly, get rid of Donald Trump and elect Joe Biden for our next president.
Indeed.
And then we will be in a position to conduct oversight investigations. We will control House, Senate, and the presidency. So there'll be no doubt that there will be cooperation, and we'll get down to the bottom of what happened on so many different issues during this Trump administration, because it's important that we know what has happened so that we do not allow anybody to make the same errors again or same mistakes. It's important that we know, that the American people know how this president has abused his authority and jeopardized our freedom in doing so.
Indeed. Georgia seems to always be in the midst of the voter suppression activities and the fight for unfairness in voting. Most recently, the rollout of new voting machines and precinct closings and absentee voting challenges in the middle of a pandemic. In the June primary, we just saw all of that just colliding. Knowing that key parts of the Voting Rights Act were stripped in 2013 by the Supreme Court, the House has recently passed the Voting Rights Advancement Act, seeking to restore those safeguards so frivolously taken away. And although we don't have to count jelly beans in a jar anymore, we do still have to jump through hoops to ensure our abilities to vote. Well, Speaker Pelosi has said that the Voting Rights Advancement Act should be called the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. But where does this legislation stand currently? Is that also being held up by the Senate? Is that where we are?
Yes, it is. HR 2 was passed out of the House some months ago, and it lies in the Senate graveyard under the domain of the Grim Reaper, Mitch McConnell. And it doesn't look like, even with the passing of John Lewis, it will not be enough to awaken people to their responsibility to all of the citizens, not just to Republicans, but to Black voters, to any voter that may not be inclined to vote Republican. They want to try to suppress those votes. And so they're suppressing the African American vote. That's been something that John Lewis has fought ever since he started fighting when he was in his 20s. Even as a teenager, I think he was fighting for voting rights. But I know once he became 21 years old, he was working with Dr. King, and they were trying to break the barriers that prevented Black folks from registering to vote. So, based on John Lewis and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend C.T. Vivian, Andrew Young, and a host of other people, Ralph David Abernathy, all of these civil rights veterans, Hosea Williams, James Bevel, so many others who I should not be naming names because I don't want to leave anybody out, but so many, Jesse Jackson, I mean, so many, but these folks died, Medgar Evers, people died for us to have this right to vote. We finally established it with the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but ever since then, there have been efforts to suppress our votes, even to this day. And so the Supreme Court even got into the fray when they overturned the Voting Rights Act, Section 4, the coverage formula for states that would be forced to pre-clear any changes to the voting practices. They would have to pre-clear it with either the Justice Department or a 3-judge panel of Washington, D.C. District Court judges. And the Supreme Court gutted the coverage formula, which means that no states are now covered by the Voting Rights Act. So there is no pre-clearance requirement. And so once that pre-clearance requirement was taken off these jurisdictions, then they began all kinds of procedures that are now in place to suppress the vote. And that's why we need to renew the Voting Rights Act with the passage of HR 2 so that we can get at these practices that states like Georgia have a history of imposing on the people for the purpose of suppressing the vote. Things like closing down precincts, things like new voting machines and ID and voting processes just whatever they decide they want to do now, they can do it. Whether or not it has a disproportionate impact on Black voters or not. And that's something that John Lewis has given his life for. And in his name and in his honor, we've got to proceed to pass essentially what is the Voting Rights Act of the 21st century.
Indeed. Is there anything in that language about online voting? I hear a lot from the younger generation that we can pay bills online, we can basically do everything else online.
Do our banking online. I mean, that's secure.
Absolutely.
Certainly, we can find a way of secure voting. I mean, we're doing everything else virtually now. You don't have to be in person. And so, but we still vote on, Tuesday, I think first Tuesday of the month, when it's general election, first Tuesday in November. That's an old agrarian move, the calendar. I mean, the reasons why it's on Tuesday and, without any early voting, that's like a relic of the past. Then we put in early voting, but we still making people actually have to go to the polls. When in fact, at least we can put an emphasis on voting from home, which is basically mail voting. I mean, white folks have been doing that forever, absentee voting. But as soon as Black folks get hip to the game and start using voting from home, then it becomes insecure, and voter fraud is what folks start talking about at that point. But all the while, they continue to do it themselves. Right. So it's a lot of duplicity and just
hypocrisy, maybe.
Hypocrisy. There you go. That's the word.
That word comes to mind because if my memory serves me correct, the president himself voted absentee in the last election.
Yeah, he has a history of voting by mail, voting from home, but everybody else, it's fraud. And he's even saying now that, he suspects that, voting by mail is going to be the fraud that causes him to lose the election. So therefore, he can't guarantee that he's going to respect the results of the elections. I mean, this is crazy.
It's crazy. Crazy is an understatement. So the federal unemployment supplement expires at the end of this month. I don't have to tell you that the extra $600 that Congress added in March, while not a stopgap, is a great help to many now not working families in the nation. A lapse in funding could be devastating, not just to the economy, but to many Americans looking simply just to pay bills on time and maintain residence. Can you comment on where you see this dire situation headed right now?
Well, the House passed what is known as the HEROES Act back in June. Over almost 60 days ago, that act was passed, and it was a $3 trillion bill that extended the unemployment benefit, the federal unemployment benefit, through January 31st of 2021. And it also puts money, gives people cash payments in their pockets. I mean, 51 million jobs have been lost since this coronavirus pandemic began. 51 million jobs, and 40 plus million are no longer working today. And they are needing that extra $600 a week in federal unemployment benefits, because state unemployment benefits only cover 40, 50% of the wage that the person who is drawing the unemployment used to make. So the $600 goes towards restoring people to close to where they were before they lost their jobs. And, $600 a week, that's $2,400 a month. Very difficult to make it on that. But just think, if you did not have that $2,400 coming in per month, and you've got rent, you've got a mortgage, you've got food, you've got utilities, you've got a car note, you've got gas to put in your car, you got clothing, for your children, just so, people need this money. They need that cash stimulant, $1,200. That, one time people got that $1,200, and these Republican senators think that that's enough. That's too much. You're just giving people money, but no, you're helping to keep people's heads above water, and you're also keeping your economy going, because the first thing those people do is go out and pay for necessaries with that money, and so that keeps your economy going. So the HEROES Act has money for people, in addition to bailing out states and local governments, which have lost revenues and are having to lay off now. If we really want to see unemployment, then we will not take care of those state and local governments, and they have to lay off people. That's going to add to the unemployment rolls. That will help to collapse the economy. We simply can't allow that to happen. And we need more testing in this country. Testing is what Nancy Pelosi likes to say, but it costs a lot of money to do testing. So the HEROES Act has $75 billion in it to help with testing, because that's the way that we're going to, knowing who's infected is going to be the means by which we're able to flatten the curve of infections going up. We need to flatten that curve, stop the infection rate. And once we do that, then we will be able to start reopening so that the economy can start growing again. We don't want this economy to collapse. So HEROES Act and those benefits for people, I'm glad to say that today, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer met with administration officials to see their plan. And I don't know what the results of that plan are, but it is a start. And so hopefully House and Senate will be able to negotiate a piece of legislation which both chambers can pass and get signed into law before July 31st, which is when that federal unemployment benefit will lapse or run out.
Yeah, I think that's my question is, so if it does run out, could they extend it as they still negotiate, or how does that work?
Well, unfortunately, it's if there's no legislation in place when July 31st gets here, and there's no extension that has been passed, then the benefits will run out. So I'm confident that between now and then, some kind of a deal will be reached.
Okay.
I'm hopeful.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Next, I chuckle when I say this, but so many people know you, of course, as a legislator, as a member of the judiciary and your political side, but many don't know that you, sir, are a musician as well. And I would you like to elaborate on that at all before I go any further? Am I allowed
Well,
to say that?
yeah, you are, and
Okay.
when I was, I started playing in a band, playing the drums when I was 13 years old, and
You know, your mom told me all about this, right? So I'm
is
just,
that right?
yes, she did. So go right
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So I wasn't a very good drummer, but I still played a little bit, played around. Folks would let me play with them.
Yes, sir.
And I did that all the way through law school. And then once I got past law school and came back to Atlanta to begin my law practice, I just put the drums away and didn't play for probably 20 years or so. And then I picked, well, maybe 15 years. And then I picked the drums back up, went and got a set, and looked at that set for so long down in my in my basement. I'd play every once in a while, but over the last few years, I've gotten more anxious to kind of pick that skill up and start working on my skills again. And but I'm just in awe of the great drummers that are out here, and I understand how much one has to hone his craft and his skills in order to be at the point where these drummers are today.
Yes.
So, so maybe one day I'll get to a point where I feel like I can come out of the woodshed a little bit, but not quite yet.
Okay.
I
Well,
really would like to find a teacher, and I did take some lessons. Took lessons from a jazz drummer named Shelly Mann
oh
in
my,
Washington D.C. Uh,
absolutely.
Probably when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, around in there. And I still remember some of the things that he taught me, which I really did not. I was so ready to just get out there and play. Times in terms of working on the rudiments and things like that, I kind of just put those things aside. But I've gotten back to them, and now once you learn these things, you have to develop the feel for how to utilize it in today's music. And so,
Indeed.
I've got a long way to go, but I'm excited just thinking about it. And I tell you, I've also always wanted to learn how to play guitar. So lately, I have been just kind of teaching myself how to play guitar. You got so much on the internet that you can pull down
Absolutely.
and kind of teach yourself different things. And so I'm kind of doing that with the guitar. So I've got you know a couple of acoustic guitars and a an electric guitar, and I find a lot of joy just in playing those.
How you find time to do that, sir, I will never know.
Well,
But
I tell you, that's why I'm so behind on my emails, and you know, you try to do one thing, other stuff slips, but
yes,
you know, try to just do what you can when you can. I guess
yeah,
that's
yes,
my
sir.
motto.
Well, when you get back here to Atlanta, I mean, we have there's little John Roberts and Jay Fly and J.
Yeah,
Rod Sullivan and my music director Quentin Robinson, and there's some fantastic drummers here who I'm sure would just love to sit down with you. Landon Anderson, just so many of these great drummers here in town who would love to sit down with you and you know let shed with you, as they say.
yeah, 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 yeah. So I'm looking forward. It's a matter of time
Yes,
and
sir.
timing,
So,
because all of these drummers are so busy also. So
yeah,
all of you musicians are, you know, doing what you do, and so when I have time, others don't. It's just crazy, but we'll get to it.
yes,
We'll
sir.
get to it.
Well, listen, so I was able to watch your Instagram live with Hank last Saturday with musician, producer, executive Prophet, where you displayed more of your knowledge of the music industry's quest for corrective legislation, to wit, the Music Modernization Act of 2018. And I also recall that the late Congressman John Conyers had been working on legislation to correct the issue that the United States is one of only four nations that do not pay artist royalties for terrestrial radio. Terrestrial radio airplay does not pay royalties to artists, songwriters and publishers, yes, but not artists. Um, the other countries not well known for their artistic freedom of copyright protection are China, North Korea, and Iran. Um, I just remember when Congressman Conyers was bringing about that legislation, and I thought about Mr. Levi Stubbs from the Four Tops, one of my favorite singers of all time.
Yeah, great singer, man. Levi
Who's Oh
Stubbs.
my God, and whose
Goodness.
voice is probably one of the most recognizable singing voices of the 20th century, and just even still today you hear his voice in commercials and all of that. But seeing as how he didn't write those great big hits that the Four Tops had, those were mostly Holland Dozier Holland compositions. Mr. Stubbs was never paid for any of that airplay, for millions and millions and millions of airplay of songs that you heard. He was never paid for any of that, and I just find that just very curious. And again, the United States, China, North Korea, and Iran are the only four companies that don't, four countries that don't pay royalties to artists for terrestrial radio. And even in the Music Modernization Act, that has not been rectified. And so, in a previous conversation with you, I talked about some things that I wanted to kind of do in furtherance of my life and career. And so one of those is a
Yeah,
mission to
I
rectify
I
that.
I went to the internet and well, actually, you sent me the link, and I listened to that link. I like that rendition that you did. I don't recall the title of the song, but it's was
Yeah,
it?
it's wishing on a star.
Yeah, "Wishing on a Star," a
Yes, sir.
modern day version. Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes. But
techno and upbeat.
yes,
Yeah,
sir. Yes, sir. But I really
dance music.
want to make sure that I think the whole thing about leaving the world a better place than when you found it. But before I leave here, I want to make sure that artists are paid for their airplay on radio and not just songwriters and publishers. And that's easy for me to say. As a songwriter, I've had a lot of success, but I want to see fairness in that piece right there. So, and I know
Yeah,
that's a legislative action that has to happen. So, um,
yeah, it is. It's a shame that we enjoy these renditions of artists. We enjoy how they put that tune down, how they sung that song,
mhm.
and we enjoy those renditions forever. And the artist who we're enjoying doesn't get paid. That's something is wrong with that, and
Yes,
it's something that we need to correct legislatively. The other countries in the world who do pay royalties, terrestrial radio royalties to performers. They collect uh, the revenues that would go to the artists, but they don't pay them out. So I think that money, there's a pot of money that is out there internationally that the artists could draw upon. And all it takes is for America to join the rest of the civilized world. We don't need to be a part of that club with North Korea and who was it? China, you said?
China and Iran. Yes,
China and Iran. Yeah, we
yes,
don't need to be members of that club. Uh, and once we join the other countries, those other countries would expect their artists, if their songs are played here in America, then those artists would be paid. And then our artists whose music is played over in foreign countries, then they would pay foreign royalties to those artists. So, I mean, so there's it's an issue of fairness, and
Yes.
it's a shame that performing artists have to work until they drop, because that's the only way that they're going to get paid is by performing live. And as you know, right now, I mean, venues are not open for live performances.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what does that even look like for the foreseeable
Yeah.
future? So yeah.
Well, you said it at the top. It might be a while. It's going to be a while before things open back up. Yeah. And so got to get that unemployment benefit put in place.
Absolutely. Well, on February 1st, 2018, I had the esteemed honor to organize a performance called Respect Yourself, the Music of a Movement here in Atlanta at City Winery. And the entire evening was a tribute to the unsung hero of the civil rights movement, the music, and to my hero, the giant of the civil rights movement, Congressman John Robert Lewis. And you, sir, were so gracious as to attend and to introduce Congressman Lewis. However, as he was attending an event in Selma, Alabama, he took the time to send us a thank you video. And we played the video that night, but I have not played that video since. And tonight, with your permission, I would like to play it for everyone.
Let's do it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Congressman Johnson, my friend and brother, for those kind words. Thank you, Kipper, for finding a way to get in the way. As I said so many times to young people, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to stand up, to say something, to speak up, and never, ever give up. The vote is precious. It is almost sacred. It is my hope and my desire that each and every one of you this year will play a role in encouraging all of our citizens to become active in a movement to change America and change it forever. Thank you very much for this honor.
Wow. That says so much about you, and it says so much about Congressman Lewis. I know of so many people who would not have had the time to sit down and record a video for someone who's honoring them. I know a lot of people who wouldn't have the time to do that because if they couldn't be there and receive the love, themselves, then they wouldn't really care. But the kind of guy that John Lewis was, he's willing to give to anybody. And he's so humble that he was genuinely appreciative of your honor. And you had the foresight, Kipper, to give the man his roses while he was living. And I tell you, we had such a great time at the City Winery that night. I even saw somebody who I would never have thought I would have seen at the City Winery. It was your pastor.
Indeed.
Yeah. So Ken Samuels had to come out and check you out, and you performed. You did a great performance. Great tight band. Great tight routine. Everybody enjoyed it, and it was a wonderful evening. So thank you for honoring my mentor, John Lewis. And it doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but that was February of 2018.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for doing that. And it's really touching. I've cried so many tears since he passed. I'm about cried out, but it was very touching to see him in the flesh and to hear him. And that's a keepsake that you have. That's very nice.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for always being accessible. I don't know anyone in your position that has always just been so accessible, so reachable. And I appreciate that more than you'll ever know. And I appreciate you taking out the time, and I appreciate your patience tonight in sticking with us and making sure that this happened. Of course, we could go on and on for hours talking more about all these subjects and more. But I just wanted to call this a conversation in black and white. And I didn't mean that from a racial standpoint, but just in a factual standpoint of this is the way things are, and this is the way things need to be. Because I know that you always keep it real. You keep it 100 whenever we talk. And I appreciate that about you. So thank you so much again for taking out the time to do this tonight. And I really appreciate it. So.
Well, thank you for having me, Kipper. And you continue to do. You are a guy that likes to give back also. And so I'm looking forward. I know you are in school now, working on another iteration of yourself. And I'm looking forward to seeing you as you emerge to pursue your dream of being an educator and being someone who reaches out for young people to and others to uplift themselves through knowledge. And so thank you so much for all that you do. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. And I'm doing a Instagram live thing these days. So
Yes.
well, you saw my second one last week with Prophet, and
Yeah.
I'd like for you to come on with me on one of these Saturday afternoons, and I'll be talking with you about it.
I would be more than happy to do that. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, Congressman Hank Johnson, thank you so much again. God bless you. Give him hell down there, buddy.
Well, thank you, sir. And
Yes, sir.
yeah, you take care of yourself and be safe.
Yes,
And
sir.
everybody
You as well.
out there, y'all be safe too.
Yes, sir. Thank you all tonight for tuning in. This has been No Better with Kipper Jones, and I just want to say thank you to the Status Network for giving a singer-songwriter with a conscience an opportunity to use it, and thank you to my producer Jack Trey. Thank you to the voice, Mr. Reggie Prime, to my manager, Mr. Johnny Cornegay, to David for sharing me with the world, and thank you all for tuning in. I hope that you take something away from this evening that made you more informed than when you tuned in. And remember the words of Dr. Maya Angelou: do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. Knowing is hot. Knowing is sexy. Knowing is love. And knowing is life. God bless you. God keep you is my prayer. Until next time.
The views and opinions expressed on No Better are those of its host and guest and do not reflect those of the Status Network or any of its affiliates.